Dad's gone. My 8-year-old daughter screamed in panic while snorkeling. What's more, my husband who went to help her was swept away by the waves. Despite a desperate search, he never returned. 10 years have passed since that accident, and my daughter is now 18. As I watched her all grown up at her coming-of-age ceremony, I felt tears welling up in my eyes. However, at the venue, I witnessed a shocking scene. I met my husband Eddie, who was the same age as me, through scuba diving. I loved all sports, especially water sports, which I enjoyed year-round. He was also in love with the sea and captivated by the allure of diving. "Lindsay, would you like to go diving with me next time?" We hit it off and spent every holiday at the sea, enjoying various sports together. Eventually, we got married and were blessed with our daughter, Dakota. She started swimming lessons as a baby, and 8 years had passed. On weekends and holidays, it became our family tradition to go to the sea and enjoy snorkeling and diving. However, lately, we've been having strong winds on our days off, making it impossible to go to the sea due to high waves. Despite this, Eddie would still say he wanted to go diving every weekend. "Don't go in this weather. It'll be fine." He should understand the dangers of the sea. What if something happens? Besides, we have a family now, so don't be reckless. I understand, he'd say, but every time I held him back, he'd become irritable and go out somewhere. Eddie must have been stressed from not being able to dive for nearly a month during the best season for water sports. Then one day, he said, "The waves seem a bit calmer today. Why don't we all go to the beach? Is it safe?" "Don't worry. The weather isn't bad, and I'm telling you it's fine." Our destination was a place with calm currents where we often dived. "Well, if you say so," I agreed, partly because I wanted to go to the sea after so long. When we arrived at the beach, Eddie prepared for scuba diving, while Dakota and I got ready for snorkeling. Feeling the wind was still a bit strong, we decided to enjoy diving in relatively shallow waters. Dakota, who had been practicing snorkeling since she was 5, had quickly improved and could now swim as well as I could. She was overjoyed to see fish in the sea, and I smiled at her delight. As time passed and I started to feel a bit cold, I gestured to Eddie that I would take a short break and asked him to watch over Dakota. He nodded okay and stayed with her. But just after I got out of the water, I heard Dakota scream from behind me. "Help! I can't breathe." When I turned around, I saw my daughter about to drown. Eddie, who should have been nearby, was nowhere to be seen. I quickly grabbed a float and swam towards Dakota. "It's okay, stay calm. Hold on tight." My daughter, who was struggling in the water, kept screaming, "Dad's gone." After I got Dakota to the beach, I went back into the sea to look for my husband. Someone nearby had contacted the police and rescue teams, and despite an intense search, Eddie wasn't found. I was left with nothing but regret, blaming myself for agreeing to come to the sea that day. The search was eventually called off, and his whereabouts remained unknown. Whenever I had time, I would go to the sea alone to search for my husband, but time passed without any clues. It was too painful to stay in a place with so many memories of him, so shortly after the accident, I decided to return to my parents' home with my daughter. I thought changing our environment might help us feel a bit better. Time flowed on, and 10 years passed since Eddie went missing. He was legally presumed dead. Since he disappeared, my daughter and I had been living supporting each other emotionally, somehow making it through together. However, that tragic accident had cast a dark shadow not only on my heart but on my daughter's as well. I'm afraid of water. I understand. But you don't have to force yourself, it's okay. The shock of seeing her father disappear before her eyes was immeasurable, and since that day, Dakota had stopped swimming. However, as she entered middle school, she gradually overcame her fear and started attending swimming classes again. I was proud of Dakota for showing the will to move forward. Her swimming improved steadily, and following her wish, she entered a high school known for its strong swimming program. It was a school in the town where we used to live as a family of 3 when Eddie was still with us. I decided to move again to fulfill my daughter's wish. After enrolling, Dakota was always busy with club activities and attending classes, but she seemed to be enjoying herself. She's overcome it in her own way. I'm glad. I was happy to see the visible change in my daughter's feelings. Even for me, the time I spent thinking about my husband decreased, as I was busy with work and supporting my daughter. Then came the day of Dakota's coming-of-age ceremony at 18, and that morning, I decided to bring Eddie's memorial photo to the venue. As we walked side by side, memories of the days I had protected and raised her flashed through my mind like a movie. A complex mix of emotions swirled in my chest, joy at being able to witness her growth, and sadness at my husband's absence. Mom, I'm going now. See you later. When we arrived at the venue, Dakota spotted her friends and ran towards them with a beaming smile. I watched her warmly from a distance as she chatted happily with her friends. Then, Dakota's smile grew even brighter as she jogged towards another spot. There was another friend wearing a glamorous dress like my daughter. And a little distance away, probably her parents, were smiling as they watched the girls. The 2 of them were holding hands and chatting animatedly. You look gorgeous. The dress suits you so well, they complimented each other. But at that moment, I noticed something odd. The friend's father suddenly changed his expression and left the spot. Oh, I wonder what's wrong. Curious, I followed him with my eyes. He stopped at a position where the girls couldn't see him and seemed to be secretly observing the situation. As I squinted to get a better look at his face, I froze. The man standing there was none other than Eddie, who was supposed to be missing. Despite the 10 years that had passed, there was no mistaking it. My heart started pounding furiously, and I instinctively clutched my chest. The moment I recognized his presence, I found myself hiding behind a nearby pillar. Why is he here? The words escaped my lips before I could stop them. Is it really Eddie? If he was alive, why didn't he come back? Why has he built a family with someone else? My head was spinning with questions that kept popping up one after another. I tried to calm myself by taking deep breaths, but it wasn't working. Just then, an announcement echoed through the venue, signaling the start of the ceremony. Dakota waved goodbye to her friend, and they each headed into the hall. I stood rooted to the spot until Eddie's figure completely disappeared from view, waiting for the storm of emotions raging in my chest to subside. "How was the ceremony?" I managed to ask Dakota calmly when she returned home. "It was fun. I was so happy to see everyone." "That's wonderful. Who was that friend you were talking to before the ceremony started?" "Oh, that was Anna. She's a friend from the same swimming school." Dakota answered with a smile. It was a name I had heard from her several times before. Apparently, their house was about a 30-minute drive away, and Dakota had visited Anna's home a few times since they became close friends. "So, does that mean he hasn't met my daughter at home yet? Or did Anna and her mother know and approach my daughter intentionally?" No matter how much I thought about it, I couldn't find the answers. Since Eddie went missing, every day had been a cycle of faint hope and despair. There were times when Dakota blamed herself, saying her father disappeared because she almost drowned. Each time she said that, I felt anger welling up towards my husband for making our daughter feel this way. Somehow, we managed to get through those days. I had come to terms with the fact that there was no point in blaming a husband who would never return, and had finally reached a point where I could live peacefully. But now, my heart had been thrown back to 10 years ago. I can't forgive him. Filled with rising anger and questions about my husband's actions, I decided to take action. 2 months later, on a holiday, I visited her friend's house with my daughter. When we rang the doorbell, Anna greeted us with a smile. She cheerfully said, "Welcome," and led us into the house. In the kitchen, I saw her mother, Stephanie, brewing coffee. "Excuse us. Thank you for always taking care of my daughter." When I called out to her, she showed us a smile similar to Anna's. "Welcome. Please make yourselves comfortable." And in the living room, there was one more person sitting on the sofa. That person slowly turned around, and upon seeing my face, turned pale. It was indeed my husband, Eddie. "It's been a while. I'm Lindsay, who was your wife until you went missing 10 years ago. Do you remember?" My words made my husband stammer. "Huh? Is this really Dad? Didn't he die in that accident?" Dakota also exclaimed in surprise, staring intently at his face. "What are you talking about? Isn't this a case of mistaken identity?" Whether out of fear or shock, his eyes were wide open and his mouth was trembling slightly. The surprise and confusion were clearly visible on his face. "Honey, what's wrong?" Stephanie came into the living room. "No, it's nothing," Eddie tried to cover up, flustered. Stephanie looked straight at him. "What do you mean by wife before you went missing?" My voice had apparently reached Stephanie's ears, and my husband became even more flustered. "This person is mistaken. I know everything. That you abandoned Lindsay and Dakota to be with me," she calmly stated, cutting off his words as he tried to make excuses in a loud voice. Eddie froze at her words. "Actually, I had visited this house a month ago. To confirm if the man I saw at the coming-of-age ceremony was really my husband, I decided to meet Anna's mother. I had Dakota ask if we could visit to thank them for being kind to her, and we arranged a time to talk. And so, my daughter and I visited their home. When we were shown into the room, Dakota and Anna said they were going to play games and immediately headed upstairs. This was perfect as I didn't want them to hear what I was about to discuss. I remember feeling a bit relieved. After barely exchanging greetings, I took a photo out of my bag. "I wanted you to see this," I said, placing it in front of Stephanie. She picked up the photo and her eyes widened in surprise. It was a family photo taken 10 years ago. I told her that the man in the photo was my husband and the same man who had been standing next to her at the coming-of-age ceremony. She seemed incredulous at first, but as I explained in detail, she agreed to help me, albeit half skeptically. I heard the story from her. "Will you honestly tell us everything now?" As all four of our gazes focused on him, Eddie visibly began to panic. "I really don't know what you're talking about." He spoke haltingly, still thinking he could get away with it. I took an envelope out of my bag and thrust it at my husband. "Can you still make excuses after seeing this?" Eddie hastily took it from me and pulled out the contents. Why is something like this?" My husband stared at the paper in bewilderment. It was the result of a DNA test between Eddie and Dakota. It stated that there was a 99% or higher probability that he was her biological father. "On the day of the coming-of-age ceremony, I found you hiding a little distance away from these girls, unnaturally watching Dakota." Sweat was beading on his forehead, probably never imagining that I had seen him that day. I asked Stephanie to cooperate with a DNA test to prove your relationship with Dakota, to confirm that you really were Eddie. "Stephanie, why did you cooperate?" My husband looked at her with a sad face, as if he had been betrayed. I couldn't believe Lindsay was lying. "And then I started to doubt you." Saying this, Stephanie lowered her eyes. The shock of being lied to by Eddie must have been great for her too, and she must have had a painful month. Compared to when I first visited, Stephanie looked a bit pale and had dark circles under her eyes. I felt sorry for causing her such distress by revealing the truth. But ultimately, this was all because of my husband's actions. You know, Dakota and Anna happened to go to the same swimming school. They became good friends, and Dakota has visited our home several times before. Eddie, who apparently didn't know this, turned to look at Dakota and Anna. "How can such a coincidence?" "Well, this girl rarely talked to you during her teenage years, so I guess it's not surprising you didn't notice," Stephanie said with a sigh. "When I first visited this house, she told me about how she met Eddie. Stephanie had divorced her ex-husband soon after Anna was born when she discovered his debts, and had been living as a single mother since then. As Anna grew older, Stephanie pursued her long-standing interest in scuba diving and got her license. She met Eddie when she participated in a group diving session. She took a liking to Eddie, who taught her kindly, and they met several times at the sea, deepening their relationship. This was about 11 years ago. Then one day, Eddie approached her with a serious look, saying he had something to discuss. At that time, you told her that you were being treated terribly by your wife and were at your mental limit. But your wife wouldn't agree to a divorce, so you needed help. You said you could only rely on her. My husband's face turned pale at my words. Stephanie, who was attracted to Eddie at the time, agreed and went along with his plan. You said you wanted to start a new life by pretending to go missing. I pressed my husband relentlessly. I never treated you terribly, and our marriage wasn't bad. If the reason you went missing was because of an affair, this is too much. The anger and sadness from 10 years ago welled up again, and I appealed to Eddie, holding back my tears. His disappearance was a fabrication. He really just wanted to be with Stephanie. On the day of the accident, my husband deliberately let water into Dakota's snorkel to make her panic. While my eyes were on Dakota, he pretended to be swept away by the tide, circled around to the rocks, and left the scene in Stephanie's waiting car. For a while, Eddie lived in hiding to avoid being discovered by me or our daughter. Why are you living so close by anyway? Didn't you move to your parents' home? I guess you let your guard down after finding out somehow. Having grown accustomed to living openly, my husband had probably forgotten about our existence and was enjoying life with his new family. However, he didn't know that we had moved back to this area when Dakota started high school, so he might have felt completely safe. For 10 years, I unknowingly hurt Lindsay and Dakota. I can't forgive myself or you for lying to two families. Stephanie, with her hands clenched and voice trembling, bowed deeply to us with tears in her eyes. Anna worriedly stood close to her. Stephanie, it's not your fault. Please raise your head. This man is the cause of everything. She too had been lied to all this time and was a victim. Perhaps because of this, I didn't feel anger or hatred towards Stephanie. Do you understand how much pain your reckless actions have caused everyone here? I turned back to my husband and glared at him. I just wanted some free time. Before we got married, you always let me go diving, but after the child was born, you started complaining. His childishly selfish excuses were so absurd that I could only sigh in disbelief. Besides, you must have received insurance money when I was presumed dead, right? Isn't that good? My husband said with a slight smile, uttering something unbelievable. Eddie probably couldn't even imagine our feelings over these 10 years. We didn't need money. How many thousands of times had I wished for my husband's life back instead? I never thought I'd hear such heartless words. The tears I had been holding back started to fall. You're the worst. I don't want to be with you anymore. At that moment, Stephanie, who had been listening to Eddie's comments and watching my reaction, shouted, "Ha! Don't say that." Even in this situation, did he think he could continue living with them as before? My husband looked dejected. Well then, Lindsay, let's start over. Let's fill the 10-year gap from now on. I was so surprised by those words coming out of his mouth that even my tears stopped flowing. At that moment, Dakota and Anna stepped forward in front of Eddie. What? No way. This person is not my father. My only family is my mom." Then Anna added, "I never want to see your face again," dismissing my husband. The girls glared at Eddie while holding hands tightly and leaning against each other. Even my usually unflappable husband seemed shocked by this and couldn't say anything in return. "We'll walk our own path from now on. There's no place for you here." Encouraged by the girls, I pushed Eddie away. My husband, probably realizing there was nothing more he could do, collapsed to his knees on the spot. After that, Stephanie divorced Eddie. Eddie's parents also cut ties with him when they learned the truth. As compensation to me and Stephanie, Eddie agreed to pay $20,000 to each of us, so he's been working day and night. Dakota and Anna now attend the same university. They still go to the sports club together to swim, competing over their times and diving durations. Stephanie and I have become good friends. Like the vast, endless sea, we continue our voyage into the future, our hearts full of infinite possibilities and hope.